Buonasera a tutti, good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana and I would like to welcome back our regular listeners and also welcome any new listeners. Also be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at Italian Radio Hour and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on any past video interviews. Vorrei dare il benvenuto ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo, grazie per essere con noi anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana. In Italy, cookies are more than sweets. They are stories. They carry the fragrance of toasted almonds, the warmth of olive oil, and the quiet rhythm of hands shaping dough in kitchens where traditions have been passed down for generations. Today on the Italian Radio Hour, we travel across Italy through its cookies with cookbook author and food writer Domenica Marchetti, whose work celebrates the people, places, and traditions that make Italian cooking so special. Born in New York to a family with deep roots in Abruzzo, Domenica spent her childhood summers in Italy learning recipes and traditions from her mother and aunts. After earning a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University and working as a newspaper reporter, she turned her storytelling skills toward food. Today, she is the author of 9 cookbooks dedicated to Italian cuisine, from pasta and vegetables to preserving traditional flavors. Her newest book, Italian Cookies, Authentic Recipes and Sweet Stories from Every Region, takes readers on a delicious journey across Italy's 20 regions, discovering the stories and traditions behind some of the country's most beloved sweets. So don't go anywhere, ma prima pubblicità. Parli italiano? Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring, in person or online, to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at istitutomondoitaliano.org. Domenica, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today on the Italian Radio Hour. How are you?
Hi, Viviana. It is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, obviously, anytime I hear Abruzzo, even though I'm not Abruzzese, first of all, I do wear my presentosa in the honor of our Abruzzese guest, but there is a lot of curiosity that draws me to this region that is also highly represented here in the United States. And I'm sure a lot of people would be interested in learning more about your childhood summers in Abruzzo. What were the summers like? What were you doing in the kitchens with your mom and aunt or just any other family member?
Well, I will tell you,
By?
they were like a fairy tale. It was wonderful. So my mother was born and raised in Chieti, in Abruzzo, and she came over to the United States in the 1950s as a young woman. Met my dad on a blind date in New York and stayed.
We
But
always
every
love those stories.
Yeah, it's a great story. And he was Italian American, with roots in Molise and Lazio. And so, but every summer we would go to Italy for the summer. And I am kind of ashamed to say now that I spent most of that time not in the kitchen, but on the beach with my friends.
Yeah,
So
we can
I
imagine.
ate good food, but I didn't necessarily participate in the making of it so much when I was growing up. But I absorbed a lot. My mother was a wonderful cook. She was a self-taught cook, and she cooked Abruzzese food, but also food from all over Italy and beyond. She was just a very curious home cook. But I have wonderful memories of traveling into the hills behind Silvi Marina, which is where we had our beach house, and going to look for arrosticini out in the open or small kind of hideaway restaurants. And now you find arrosticini, the little lamb skewers, pretty much everywhere in Abruzzo. But in those days, they were not that easy to find. And then, we had the porchetta trucks and the wonderful seafood of the Adriatic. So Abruzzo's just an incredible region to visit or especially be from if you are somebody who loves food.
Yes, absolutely. And so at what point, I think I read about some cookie baking marathons late in your late night Christmas. When did you start having these baking marathons and set the stage? Tell us a little bit what those rituals were around it.
Yeah, I grew up in New Jersey, and my mother always baked for the holidays. She made panettone way before it was a thing, and she also made a variety of cookies. She, of course, made pizzelle or ferratelle, depending on where in Abruzzo you're from, but those wonderful waffle, design cookies. And she also made, she called them calcionelli, but they're also known as calcionetti, calzunit, which are the little fried ravioli. Typically, they're filled with mosto cotto and chopped nuts, but she used to fill them with chopped nuts and honey and serve them with powdered sugar, and we just loved them. And so when my sister and I were little, in the weeks before Christmas, my mother would sit us down at the kitchen table, give us two nutcrackers and a big bowl of nuts, and we had to to shell all the nuts that she would use for her baking because she never wanted to use the ones that were already shelled. They were more expensive. And also, of course, if you start out with fresh, whole nuts, they're
The
fresher.
flavor,
So
yes.
that was my introduction, this tedium. But eventually, my sister and I, as we got older, we started to help her bake. She would make a big batch of gingerbread dough actually from Betty Crocker because being in the US, she, was adapting to the traditions in the US. And so she would make these pupazze out of gingerbread, the dolls, and we would decorate them with icing. Then, as we got older, my sister and I started baking ourselves with our mom, and we would get Gourmet Magazine, and every December they had their cookie issue, and we would pick which cookies we wanted to make, and we strayed from Italian cuisine, but this was very late night baking. And every year for a certain period, it always coincided with a Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers movie marathon on TV. And so
Uh-huh.
we would stay up till like 2 or 3 in the morning watching Ginger and Fred swirl around and twirl on the TV, and we'd bake our cookies. And uh, so I have always loved the ritual and tradition of baking cookies during the holidays. And that is no doubt what planted the seed for the book Italian Cookies.
Wonderful. Now, I wonder because I'm here in Pittsburgh, and I guess in Pittsburgh and maybe Western Pennsylvania, there is this tradition of the wedding cookie table, which is huge. And if people are not from here, they don't know what the tradition is. And it does come from different regions of Italy, and also some other European countries have it. So basically, what it started with having a few cookies laid out at weddings now is it's a huge competition of who has the best, the most. And these cookie tables are so artistically displayed, and a variety of the cookies is quite impressive. Here in Pittsburgh, we have bridges, so they have constructed also displays to enhance the beauty of these cookies. They're usually, instead of having them at the very beginning or just in the buffet in the room where the reception would be, it's showtime when the cookie table gets revealed. People have boxes, so it is a major. Have you ever heard experience, or perhaps being in Abruzzo where there was a wedding and maybe people were baking for it? Because I was growing up with the tradition of confetti, the journal almonds. So personally, I don't remember. Even if we had been there, I was too little to remember. So I was wondering if you're familiar with this tradition, heard about it, or even witnessed.
I will say, first of all, that I wish I had known about this tradition when I got married 30 plus years ago, because I had never heard of it until maybe a couple of years ago, really. And so I'm not quite sure where in Italy it originated. I think it's such a fabulous idea. Is there anything more joyful than, a giant display of cookies, lovingly baked and, like going all out? But I was not familiar with this tradition, and I wish I had been. I, like you, am familiar with the confetti tradition. In fact, when I got married, my mother, she and her sister went to Sulmona and
Sulmona. Mhm.
yeah, in Abruzzo where they make the confetti, and ordered the confetti for my wedding. So I wish I had known about this cookie tradition though, because I think it's really wonderful. But I will say that the book is really Italian regional cookies. So it's not about Italian American traditions, which are wonderful in their own right. I sort of went back and forth on whether I wanted to include some of that, but
Mhm.
I think it would have been a very different book and kind of unwieldy to do both Italian and Italian American. And so, please don't come after me with pitchforks, people, because there's no Italian rainbow cookies in that book. But I really did need to concentrate on cookies throughout Italy's regions. So I had to limit, getting into the traditions of Italian American baking, which in itself is a glorious thing too.
Yeah, so even because, as I said, there is only so much you can pack in a book, and there is always half of the content that gets left out. So, but that actually leads me to a question that I think is also tied with your journalism background at Columbia, because you work as a reporter, and what fascinates you the most when investigating a dish, a culinary tradition, because now you do it under the two aspects of that investigative reporting characteristics of your background, and now obviously as an author of cookbooks.
Yes, I will say my journalism background has served me really well in writing cookbooks because for me, yes, a good recipe, an accurate recipe is super important, of course. When you're trying to put dinner on the table, you don't necessarily need to hear the whole history of what you're making. But for me, the most fascinating part of the recipe is the story behind it and the people who are making it. And so, a few years ago, to give you an example related to the cookie book, I was in Genoa. I was doing a small tour. I do occasional culinary tours in Italy. And so I was getting ready to take a group of people on a day trip, and I stopped at a pasticceria in Genoa while we were waiting for our guests, and I just picked up this little bag of flower-shaped butter cookies. And I had never heard of them before. They were called canestrelletti.
Nestle.
And yeah, yeah. And when I bit into one, I fell in love with this cookie. The consistency, the butteriness, the pureness of the flavor. There was something about it. I just wanted to know more. And so on the bag, I saw that they were called Canestrelletti di Toriglia, which is a town in the hills about 45 minutes from Genova. So after my tour was over, I drove up into the hills and I found that this town of Toriglia has become famous for these cookies. It was once a resort town for Genovese who wanted to escape the heat of summer. They would go into the hills and stay in Toriglia. But like so many other hill towns across Italy, as you know, they've fallen on hard economic times as people have left looking for work and, moving to cities, moving out of Italy even. But some years ago, a couple of decades ago, there was a consortium that was formed to kind of take advantage and valorizzare this cookie, which dates back. They found historical evidence that it dates back to the 15th century. So it
Mhm.
has a long history in Toriglia. And so they came up with guidelines, requirements for the recipe in order to, it's like the DOC or DOP, in order to be called canestrelletti di Toriglia, you have to
Mhm.
butter, eggs, flour, and sugar, nothing else. So I went to Toriglia and found this whole story behind this little butter cookie. And that's where my reporting came in handy. Now, there are about 8 bakeries in Toriglia that make the canestrelletti and they distribute them throughout the region of Liguria and even beyond. So, canestrelletti have become pretty popular in recent years as more and more people have heard about them. The bakers are very reluctant to give you their own little secrets. So you can get the official recipe online. But what I learned, I had a wonderful interview with a baker named Paola. Her last name escapes me now, but her family has been baking these cookies since like the early 20th century. And she is the family baker now. And she let me watch her bake and we chatted, about life in Toriglia, what these cookies have meant for the town's economy. There's a festa every year celebrating the cookies. But as I was listening to her, I was also watching her bake, and I realized that the key to the texture of this cookie is in how you mix the ingredients. It's really all about quality of ingredients, since there are just 4 ingredients, and technique. And
Mhm.
so I watched her closely, and when I got home, I followed her technique, and I finally unlocked the code for for these cookies. So that, I think reporting really goes such a long way when you're trying to faithfully, tell the story of a recipe.
Yeah, and also observing skills, which in this case were part of, again, the information plus watching. And it's
Yes. Also, sorry to
no,
interrupt,
no, go
but
ahead.
another important thing is you never know what you're going to find. I got in touch with Paolo Lazzaroni, who was the kind of the patriarch of the Chiostro di Saronno
Mhm.
company, the
Yeah,
Lazzaroni. They make the Amaretti
Amaretti.
Chiostro di
Mhm.
Saronno. So it was a family company called Amaretti di Saronno, but I think in the 1980s they split. And so there's now Lazzaroni, which are actually now based out of Abruzzo. And then there's Chiostro di Saronno, which is still based in Saronno. And so I went and interviewed him. This was, I think, maybe 2021 or so. And, elderly gentleman, sharp, funny, dry sense of humor. And I went to basically the factory where the cookies are made and where they have a shop, they sell things. And I was expecting this big industrial operation, and it is that somewhat. But as I was talking to him, he was telling me, stories about his family, and it turns out that the cookies are called chiostro. The company is called Chiostro di Saronno because he grew up in a chiostro in the center of Saronno, which his grandfather bought in the early 20th century. So after our interview, he invited me back to the chiostro to see the company archives. And he showed me these big books filled with, you know, 18th and 19th century beautiful ads and publicity campaigns. He's got collections of antique cookie tins displayed. And so for me, just being with this man who grew up in this family, who, doesn't really have to work another day in his life. Here he was probably in his 80, mid 80s when I talked to him, so passionate still about this work and this company and what his family built. To me, something like that is priceless.
Absolutely. I mean, it just kind of shows you that I work also for several companies where the founder, as you said, probably well established in their 80s, and there was not a day of work that they missed, both as an ethical, I think, principle, but also because that was their world. So to when you encounter those people, you know that they are like uno scrigno. They're like not just an archive. Like the stories and historical information are going to come out that no book, history book has included. And going back to the Ligurian cookies, ironically, when I first started to get involved with this wedding, the cookie table community, there are several initiatives where we bake for nursing homes, firefighters, or people or families that got hit by a natural calamity. And there is, the Facebook page has probably 330,000 members from all over the US and some also outside. And I really wanted to contribute, and I do love to cook. Baking is it depends, I mean, in the breads area, I can defend myself. I can make a mean panettone as well. But the cookies, I was seeing all this intricate work, and I was like, what do I have to offer? So, but I wanted to contribute. This was a cause that was really dear to me. So I was like, I'm going to make canestrelli. And they're these flower-shaped, unassuming cookies because there is no jelly, there is no frosting, there is nothing, just a little bit of powdered sugar. And as you said, probably mine, will now be as, they're decent, I have to say. And as soon as you see someone putting those cookies in their mouth, how they melt in their simplicity, it's a recipe that now everyone wants to, a cookie
Yeah.
wants to learn how to make. And growing up, I just, we had them as breakfast cookies in the Mulino Bianco, which is one of the companies that
Yes,
makes a lot
yes,
of the
yes.
breakfast cookies and so forth. But I really got into it. We talked about Liguria and we talk about, Saronno. But one thing that you often say is, and I totally agree with that, that Italy is a small country, but culinarily vast. Can you elaborate on this concept and potentially some of the surprises that you have discovered, like for instance, this cookie or ingredients in your
Yeah.
never-ending journey and exploration of
Yeah.
Italy?
Well, I always thought that by the time I hit middle age, which now I'm actually kind of beyond, that I would have traveled much more around the world because, I grew up going to Italy every summer. I did my junior year abroad in London. I had been to France and other parts of Europe. But the older I get, the more I feel like all I really want to do is return to Italy because, yes, Italy is a small country, but every region is deep and vast. And like you and I were saying when we first logged on, Viviana, una vita non basta. A
Mhm.
lifetime is not enough. I mean, a lifetime is not enough to understand Rome, let alone all of Italy. So I find it endlessly fascinating, and I just want to know more and more. Um, and so one way of doing that, I think, is through the culinary lens. I wrote a book about Italian pasta. This was quite a while ago, back in 2011. It was sort of a book before its time, with the current fascination with Italian pasta. I wrote another book about Italian vegetables that also was before its time. It came out in 2013. In 2015, I wrote Preserving Italy, which was looking at Italy through the lens of
Mhm.
preserving traditions in the kitchen. And, you learn so much about um, a place when you look at these recipes. For example, Piemontese cookies, baci di dama, either made with almonds or hazelnuts. Hazelnuts are big in the baking of Piemonte, chocolate, gianduja. One thing that I found so fascinating was the fact that amaretti, um, almond cookies are, you'll find them sprinkled throughout Italy, and they tend to be the same ingredients:
Mhm.
ground almonds, sugar, and egg white. And yet, again, depending on, the ratio or the quantity of ingredients, the ratio of sugar to almonds, um, how the egg whites are mixed, how the dough is shaped, whether you roll it into balls and pinch it and do it by hand, whether you pipe them, whether you put a little candied cherry, glacé cherry. I mean, the results are incredibly diverse when you're thinking, you're using just three ingredients. But this is all down to tradition and what people learn. One thing I found was in Sicily and Sardinia, almonds are really essential to the cookies
Mhm.
and to the confections in general. They really are the heart of baking. They are the ingredient. And the Sicilian Romano almonds that I tasted from Noto, if you bite into one and chew it, you will understand what the flavor of an almond is. It's very different from the California almonds that have an earthy flavor, but they don't really, you understand why something like almond extract exists if you taste an almond from Sicily, because you taste that sweet almond flavor. There's
Mhm.
nothing like it. And so you understand how much local ingredients
Mhm.
matter and how much these recipes depend on the ingredients around them. Just like all
Mhm.
of Italian cuisine, Italian cookies are regional and they differ from region to region because of the ingredients that you find in any one region and because of the history and the traditions of those regions.
Mhm. Yes, and also, for instance, to go back to Abruzzo, here you just elaborated on the almonds in Sicily, but then we have a sweet a cake called parrozzo that also
Mm,
Gabriele D'Annunzio wrote, and here you have the bitter almonds. So not almonds come are the same. Also, again, referring to Abruzzo, the production of saffron that people might not be familiar with that.
yes.
Um, and if we look at some regions, we see a pretty prominent use of saffron. The one I'm referring to is Sardinia in general for different recipes. From Abruzzo, where do you see saffron being used more frequently?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I see saffron often in minestre in soups. There's, I know, a very simple sagne ceci, which is pasta with ceci, no tomato, just kind of the broth of the chickpeas, the pasta, maybe a little bit of herbs, and a little bit of saffron. And so you see it there. You also see it in baking. There's something called soffione, which
Hmm.
is a big ricotta cake, and they call it soffione because it really puffs up and rises in the oven as it's baking. And it's got ricotta in it and lemon zest and also saffron. It has this wonderful, warm, sort of, earthy saffron flavor. It's sweet, but not too sweet. It's an Easter treat. And I actually have a recipe for it. I write a weekly newsletter called Buona Domenica, and I shared it, I think, a couple of years ago at Easter time. But it's a wonderful, very traditional cake that you find in Abruzzo. You also find saffron in sometimes on the coast you have the chitarrina, the chitarra pasta with
Hmm.
seafood, and sometimes there's maybe a little bit of tomato or no tomato, but you'll get the seafood and the flavor of the sea and a little bit of saffron in there too. But yeah, so the saffron is grown in the Navelli Plain in the
Hmm.
province of L'Aquila, and it dates back to I think maybe the 14th or 15th century when a Spanish priest who um, I think he had roots in Abruzzo in Navelli. It came back to visit family. This is the legend anyway, and had some crocus bulbs he had brought back from Spain and planted them, and that was the beginning of the saffron in Abruzzo. And they call it, oro rosso, and
Hmm.
it is really precious and just infused with a perfume and this lovely earthy richness that
Hmm.
really enhances food. Yeah.
And actually, I would like to add one piece of information to how saffron was also important to women because one topic again that we were talking in our pre-recording conversation was the gold traditions of Abruzzo that might not be as well known here in the United States, but if you are from Abruzzo, indeed, you probably have a piece of jewelry that you have inherited from a grandmother, great grandmother. So we know that we have some cross-pollination between Abruzzo, then Molise, and then Puglia because of the transumanza. And back in the day, filigree was considered the gold of the poor because they were not, the gold was sold based on weight and not the workmanship. Now we pay both. So
Yeah.
all the women would actually trade their saffron for a piece of jewelry with the goldsmith. So it was also currency to them, so to speak, to satisfy everyone's desire to own another piece of jewelry. So it can be the oro rosso for two different reasons. Now, obviously, it is the indeed, but because I had also a bartering, a very strong bartering power.
I love that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so yeah, that's as I said, it's a little obsession of mine that I've developed about these traditions. So we're gonna go into a quick break, and then we are resuming this mouth-watering conversation with Domenica Marchetti. Don't go anywhere.
Do you love Italian food? Want to learn the secrets of homemade pasta, sauces, and traditional recipes, just like Nana used to make? At Mondo Italiano, our authentic Italian cooking classes bring the taste of Italy right to Pittsburgh. From fresh pasta to regional specialties, every class is a delicious journey through Italy's culinary traditions. Spots fill quickly, so reserve your seat today. Call us at 412-478-2681 or find us online. Mondo Italiano, where Italy comes alive one dish at a time.
Un caffè, per favore. For more than 35 years, Pittsburgh has started its mornings with La Prima Espresso. From freshly roasted beans from around the world to the perfect espresso or cappuccino, every cup is crafted with care. Stop by and enjoy the warmth of our baristas and familiar faces, or bring the taste of Italy home. Order online today at laprima.com. La Prima Espresso, Pittsburgh's coffee. Okay, Domenica, we are back, and it's lovely to have also your news stack, your newsletter, Buona Domenica, because people wish each other happy Sunday. It happens to be also your name, so it's just apropos, perfect. Just a couple of minutes ago, I had up the image of the several cookbooks that you have written, and we talked about the chitarrina for pasta. And so let's maybe give some guidelines or let people think about fresh pasta and dry pasta. There might be the misbelief that one is better than the other, but the criterion that we should be using to choose one over the other is different. So elaborate on your thoughts on your school of thought on that.
I get that question a lot, actually, from people asking, well, which is better, fresh pasta or dry pasta? Or there is this assumption that fresh pasta is better because you're making it at home, which is like comparing apples and oranges. Because, as you know, I'm sure, Viviana, the two are very different products and they have their purposes. I love dried pasta. I like nothing better than, after a long, I can't say coming home from a long work day because I work in my kitchen table where I'm seated right now. But after a long day of work, there's nothing better than just putting on a pot of water, opening a package of pasta and, tossing it with either butter and parmigiano or a nice simple tomato sauce. To me, that is so satisfying. I love it. So fresh pasta, of course, is a different thing. It's a regional, like the cookies, it's very regional. And if you start in the north, you start with soft wheat flour, eggs or just egg yolks even, and it's a very delicate pasta. It's the pasta that you use to make lasagna, lasagna alla bolognese. And of course, it has to be delicate because you have to layer many layers of pasta. So you don't want a stodgy pasta. You want a very delicate, same with the capelletti or the tortellini or the ravioli. And the farther south you get, the more you see semolina introduced into the flour. You see water introduced into the mix, fewer eggs. And then by the time you get to the south, it's this wonderful mix of semolina and water, and it makes wonderful, toothsome, delicious cavatelli, orecchiette, I mean, bussiate, different shapes that
Mhm.
you just, it's flour and water, and it's a miracle what you can do with it.
Yeah.
So both dried and fresh, in my opinion, have their places at the Italian table, and one is not better than the other. Now, if you're talking brands of pasta, dried pasta, sure, some are better than others. I mean, I can tell you some of my favorites, but you probably have your own. And I think what it comes down to is um, the quality of the semolina of the ingredients, the drying time. Slow drying is what you want for dried pasta. Whether it is extruded with a bronze die to give it that nice rough surface that
Mhm.
allows the sauce to cling to it. All of these factors, are important, but I can't say that one is better than the other.
Mhm.
How do you feel about it?
It's the same. I mean, they all have their different purpose for the job. Like, for instance, if you have to mount a little picture, you'll take a little nail. If you have to mount a big picture, you'll take a bigger nail. So for certain things like la chitarrina, obviously you want to make fresh pasta. But for others, again, I've gone to Gragnano, the world's capital of dry pasta, and seeing these fusilli coming out the conveyor's belt, that I could actually eat it as it was and then see the drying chambers. Again, different tools for the job. So based on the recipe.
Exactly.
But I think we kind of share the same one, two, three, the basic salty water, because if you people say, how much salt did you put? And I said, well, it has to salt like the sea because eventually it never rinse. I said, if because we do cooking classes, if you rinse your pasta, I will deny that you and I have ever cooked together.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then I also this saving a little bit of the pasta water because you bring it back to the skillet and you let the flavor start combining before serving it. Sometimes when I go to restaurants and pasta is served as a side dish, I say, "Oh, mamma mia!" First of all, pasta
I'm
has
shaking my
no
head. Yeah.
identity, and then I call it naked pasta because you get this overcooked white penne with a dollop of something red that should resemble
Yeah.
a sauce. I'm like, no, it takes 2 seconds. Just can you mix it together? Can you mix
Yeah.
it together? And so less is more. I think what people, a message that you also a proponent to is less is more. Let every single flavor
Yes.
speak for itself.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. I see so many complicated renditions of Italian recipes, at restaurants, and a lot of it is adornment and embellishment, because, you're serving it to an American clientele or whatever, and people don't necessarily understand that in Italian cooking, most of the time, less really is more. It's
Mhm.
more about quality than, all the bells and whistles or quantity.
Yeah, and also unfortunately cheese everywhere to
Yeah.
the nth degree. Well, let's talk about veggies, okay? Vegetables play a huge role, And so, what vegetables did you grow up eating, or maybe perhaps not eating when you were a kid and adoring now as an adult?
Yeah, so I when I wrote The Glorious Vegetables of Italy, I wrote it because I felt that people really think of Italian food as pasta, pizza, maybe gelato, tiramisu, whatever, but they weren't necessarily associating Italian cooking with vegetables. And in Abruzzo, you have the Apennine Mountains, the Gran Sasso, and on one border, and then the Adriatic Sea on the other border. And in between, you have the foothills and the rolling hills and plains, and you have olive groves and vineyards, and also wonderful places to grow, peppers, onions, tomatoes, zucchini, oh my gosh, chicoria, artichokes, so many wonderful vegetables. And I loved vegetables from the time I was a child because my mother always made them, and they were just part of the meal. She used to even just boil or steam broccoli or do it gratin. We always had, she loved chicoria, and she would make chicoria. And when we were little, I guess I will say that my sister and I did not care for that. My dad wasn't big on it. So she would always make this batch of chicoria and keep it in the fridge for herself with a little bit of lemon juice. But I did grow up with, all of the vegetables, and I'm not a vegetarian, but I could very easily subsist on
Mhm.
vegetables, in the way the Italians make them, because for one thing, Italians aren't afraid to cook their vegetables. They're not afraid to have vegetables that are soft. It doesn't have to be crunchy to be good. So I like
Mhm.
to, when I cook broccoli, I sometimes roast it in the oven. I don't want it hard and crunchy. I want it to have, to mellow out a little bit.
Mhm.
Peppers are one of my favorite vegetables. I love roasted peppers, and you blacken them and peel off the skins, and then you toss them with really good olive oil and a little bit of sweet vinegar, and maybe a little bit of garlic clove and capers. I mean, I could eat peppers all day long. Tomatoes, of course, just plain tomatoes with a little bit of salt and good olive oil. You really
Mhm.
don't have to do much to vegetables other than let them be themselves and adorn them, like anoint them with very good olive oil and a little bit of, crunchy sea salt. And um, that's all, most of the time, that's all I need.
Yeah, there's nothing sweeter than a tomato in season. And that's
Yeah,
probably the biggest difference is to the seasonality, how it is respected in Italy and, and the regionality of one product over the other. And here, unfortunately, we lose that. I mean, your strawberries are available 365 days a year, and they always taste the same.
they're terrible. They're pithy. They have no flavor. They're as big as
Mhm.
apricots. That, yeah, a certain company that shall remain unnamed has really destroyed strawberries, in my opinion. But you mentioned regionality and seasonality, and I think that is so important. So years ago, we were in Puglia, with our kids, and we, just took a week's vacation, and I wanted orecchiette with cima di rapa, but it was summer, so they were nowhere to be found. It was orecchiette with tomato sauce because that's what was in season. And if you want cima di rapa, come back in the fall, So,
Like
um, it,
puntarelle, there's nothing better
yeah,
than sweet puntarelle instead of those. It's almost like wood. They're so hard or the
yeah,
artichokes. And
yeah.
um, well, let's, obviously, it wouldn't be a conversation about an Italian family if a grandmother was now brought to the table with her preserved sour cherries that inspired also your book about. preserving food and traditions. So tell us a little bit about Italy's traditions of preserving food and why has this practice been so important historically?
Well, obviously, I mean, they're preserving traditions the world over, and this was really a survival technique. People grew things in summer, and then they preserved them so that they would have food throughout the cold, harsh winters. And now it's kind of an art because, as you know, you can go to the grocery store or takeout places. You never have to cook a day in your life again or preserve anything anymore. I mean, I'm talking about us in the US. You can buy everything bottled, already done. But there's an art to it, and there's a great satisfaction, I think, to be had in preserving, making jam. I go to the farmer's market. I'm not much of a gardener, I'm sorry to say, but I go to the farmer's market and I will pick up, strawberries. We talked about fresh strawberries, cherries, plums, and I will preserve them. And there's nothing nicer than, just opening up a jar of jam that you made yourself. But what inspired that book was that my mother's mother, my maternal grandmother, Maria, um, used to make amarene sotto spirito. So sour cherries preserved in alcohol. And she died while I was still quite young. I was, I think, 8 or so when she passed away. But and she never wrote down the recipe, but she would sun dry the cherries and then mix them with sugar and brandy and alcohol, and then they would last forever. In fact, even after she passed away, there were bottles of them still, and
Mhm.
they lasted for years in my aunt's pantry in Rome. And they were very parsimonious about letting us have these cherries, my sister and me. And the only time they would let us have them is when we were having cramps.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
in order to sort of help us with cramps, they would give us a spoonful of these amarene sotto spirito. And when I was older, I had such fond memories of this, and I really wanted to create these cherries. And so I set about trying to figure out how to, make my grandmother's cherries. And I talked to my mom, and she helped me through the recipe. And I talked to other people, and I did a lot of trial and error. And I had to use different sour cherries that we have here in the US, which are the pie cherries, the Montmorency cherries that you get in Michigan. And anyway, going down that rabbit hole made me think of all the other preserved foods that Italians make. Carciofi sott'olio, peperoni sott'olio, melanzane. Also, not just things sott'olio, sotto aceto, but also the jams and the confections and the syrups and the spirits, the alcohol is also a way of preserving. So I just kind of dove into that world, and the result was the book Preserving Italy.
Wonderful. So obviously, we got together because I wanted to spend also some time to discuss your latest book that we mentioned in the introduction, Italian Cookies, Authentic Recipes and Sweet Stories from Every Region. First of all, the dedication to your mother and your sister to that kind of are with us as we're traveling through Italy in the book. But I also wanted to mention both the photographer and the illustrator because both components of the book, so the photography is done by Lauren Volo and the illustrations by Daniela Bracco. So tell us a little bit about this collaboration, whether you have worked together before. But as I said, just going through the pages, it's just this is the pooper from Lazio with the three breasts, and
Yeah.
then it just everything is so fantastic. So tell us also about these other two collaborators that we have, and then we'll dive into the book.
I'm so glad you asked about them because this book is beautiful, thanks in large part to them. That's the back of the book, and that's the front. And Lauren Volo was the same photographer who worked with me on these are Anginetti on
Mhm.
preserving Italy, and she lives in New York. And somehow, when she worked on preserving Italy, she was able to conjure, the Mediterranean light and the beautiful look of Italy in this tiny studio in Brooklyn. And I just knew I wanted to work with her again. And so I asked her if she would come onto this project with me. And she brought on a wonderful prop stylist named Maeve Sheridan. And Maeve has a studio in New York, and she's got a prop shop where she just over decades has collected all kinds of things. And so she and Lauren would set up, we had a photo shoot over about 4 or 5 days, and I baked all of the cookies and drove them to New York with my husband. I can't tell you how many containers we had filled with hundreds and hundreds of cookies, and also doughs and candied orange peel and all these extras. And then Maeve and Lauren would set up the shot. They would go down to the prop shop, and just I'm not a visual person, and I would just be overwhelmed looking at all these shelves filled with plates and goblets and props and accessories. And they would come back and set up the most beautiful shots. Maybe even found an old copy of Corriere della Sera, which made it into one of our shots. It
Uh-huh.
was just incredible, the art that they created together. Um, so, much gratitude to them for their part. Now, Daniela Bracco lives in Rome. She's originally from Sicily,
Uh-huh.
and she is the woman who illustrates my weekly newsletter, Buona Domenica, every
Uh-huh.
week. And
Yes.
I knew I wanted her to be a part of this book. So this is
Mhm.
one of the chapter intros.
Mhm.
She's got such a wonderful, whimsical style. And I also want to shout out the publisher, Gibbs Smith, and the design team, because, they obviously wanted to design the book themselves, but they were so gracious in incorporating these elements that I wanted in the
Mhm.
design, and taking, Daniela's illustrations and Lauren's beautiful photography. And then there are a few shots of Italy itself that were actually taken by me with my iPhone that they managed to. These are the
Uh-huh.
canestrelletti di Toriglia.
Yep.
Yeah, that they managed to incorporate as well, and made this beautiful book that seamlessly works together. So
Yes.
Daniela, yeah, she's a graphic illustrator, originally from Sicily, but she's just got such a wonderful eye, and she seems to know every week exactly what I need and want for the newsletter. And I knew she would be such a big addition for the
Mhm.
book, and so I'm so happy to have her as a part of it as well.
Mhm. So, what prompted you to devote to move into the cookies? So, was it the baking marathons, or it was that having traveled throughout Italy that you stumble upon things? It's like, I want to tell everyone about them. Like, you also like the favette triestine. I was in Friuli, Venezia, so I'm like, the pinolate genovesi. By the way, the picture, those pine nuts are popping. I just, I'm so grateful because again, these are like the hidden treasures of Italy that sometimes I tell people, sometimes you can skip that nth church, but go to a sagra, go to a food festival, or just take this book and little by little go and explore that one region through their authentic flavors. So, what was the inspiration for the book?
So the if I have to pick one thing, I would have to say it was the Canestraletto di Toriglia that sent me down the path. And then I was talking about it to my collaborator, my tour collaborator, Emanuela, she's from Genoa, and she said, "Oh, you need to go to Gavi and check out the Amaretti di Gavi, which is right over the border of Genoa in Piemonte, of Liguria in Piemonte." And so I went to Gavi, and somebody said, "Oh, you should go to Voltaggio, which is maybe a 10-minute drive away. They have amaretti also, but they're a little bit different." And then from there, I found amaretti di Gallarate, which are again different and have a completely different method of being, the cookie, the baking technique. And then amaretti di Saronno. And by that time, I just, every one of these cookies was associated with a town. And there's this swath of northern Italy that are just full of these cookie towns that, have a cookie associated with them. And I just thought, nobody's written this story. I mean, we all know certain cookies. We know the cantucci, from Prato. And by the way, I went to Prato and I don't know what I was expecting. I was expecting like an industrial facility making the
Mhm.
cantucci di Prato. And yet, that's it. It's a little
Mhm.
pasticceria, beautiful little
Yeah.
pasticceria in the Centro Storico. It's like a little jewel box. You go inside, the women behind the counter have, these lovely uniforms on. It's a beautiful small shop. And the recipe hasn't changed, so this bakery has been running for quite a few centuries, if I'm not mistaken. And it was opened by a man named Mate, and
Mhm.
it's
Antonio.
still, there's the cookies are still, yeah, Antonio Mate, and the cookies are still baked in that same way. And so what I found as I went throughout Italy is that the human touch is still visible in these sweets, in these cookies. I went to uh, Monferrato Casale, or I think
Mhm.
that's what it's called, in Piemonte to learn about crumiri, which are those ridged, crunchy, buttery cookies.
Mhm.
They're sort of shaped like a U or an upside down
Mhm.
U, and I believe they were the uh, the shape was the legend has it that they were either an homage or in uh, making fun of the king.
Mustache.
Yes, with the was it Umberto or Vittorio Emanuele who had the big the big mustaches. Yeah, so that's what the crumiri were supposed to be, made after. But it's a very dense dough.
Uh-huh.
And I wanted to know how they were made because I wanted to reproduce them for the book. I was looking for the page. I can't find it right now.
69.
But oh, thank you. Yeah. And so it the proprietress is a wonderful elderly woman, Casale Monferrato, and Anna Portinaro is the proprietor. Yes, there they are. And
Mhm.
she again, I was expecting a big operation. Instead, it's this beautiful little shop. And in the back, there's one room, which is basically the professional kitchen.
Mhm.
And the dough is extruded onto baking sheets. And then there
Mhm.
is a baker who hand turns every single log of dough into that mustache shape by
Oh.
hand. And then when the cookies are baked, they're there's this big pile in the next room. They're all sorted and then boxed, packaged and boxed by hand. It was
Mhm.
just incredible. Another favorite cookie that I came across was something called nocciolini di chivasso. And
Uh-huh.
those are little tiny crunchy hazelnut
Yeah.
cookies that, yeah, and there's not a picture, unfortunately, but there is one
Mhm.
of Daniela's lovely drawings. So
Illustration.
they're
Yes. Mhm.
very similar to amaretti di Saronno, but they're about the size of a chickpea. And
Oh, wow.
again, they're extruded onto the baking sheet. But once they're baked, a baker goes through each and every one, and if it's not a perfect tiny little button, it's discarded,
Mm.
before being packaged by hand. There were so many of these stories that I felt like they really needed to be um, they really needed to be told.
Hmm.
Here's one from the Castelli Romani, Serpette. Do you know the Serpette from
Yes. Hmm.
yeah, the Monteporzio Catone is the town, and there's a panificio there. It's a
Hmm.
little grocery that sells bread, and it also sells these wonderful S-shaped butter cookies. And there's a woman in the back, her son does the baking, and she takes these giant mounds of dough and
Hmm.
she pulls pieces off of them and shapes them very quickly into S's. And she's got the braces on her wrists because she's been doing this so many years, and she's like the fifth generation, and every day that is her life. But she knows what these cookies mean to the community, and
Yeah.
she does this work because I just feel it's meaningful to her. And to go in there and to be able to talk to her and watch her at her bench turning out these cookies one after the other, it was really moving. So it was these stories that I felt really needed to be
Hmm.
told. And by the way, you mentioned people going to Italy and searching out pasticcerias, but not only pasticcerias, but forni, the ovens
Forni.
where
Yeah.
bread is baked, because that's also where you'll find rustic cookies being baked. And the
Hmm.
panifici also,
Hmm.
tend to have these more rustic cookies. If you want to get to know a place, go into these places, not just the restaurants. Go into these places where the locals shop and buy their bread and their cookies, and you'll see what the
Hmm.
local life is like.
Yeah, and then read the labels and find out where exactly they were baked, if they were not there, and do like Domenica. Talk about cookies. You talk about biscotti d'inzuppo, which are the Dunkin' cookies. So why, in your opinion, they are such an important part of Italian culture?
Yes, so I feel like we don't have that here. I know that people do dunk cookies, they dunk chocolate chip cookies or whatever, but in Italy there is this whole category of cookies called biscotti d'inzuppo. And this is something that every Italian child, does from a very early age. Your breakfast is dunking your cookie in caffè latte, not so much a glass of cold milk like we do here in the US, but a bowl of caffè latte, your milk with a splash of coffee in it, and a big fat cookie. It's either a big oval or a big circle or a big, stick. And
Mhm.
these are big, generous cookies. I'm looking for one that I want to show you. Um, Ecco, no, ecco, biscotti da inzuppo. This is
Mhm.
from a forno in Matera,
Yeah, reminds me of
so
my
in
grandmother's
Basilicata.
cookies. Mhm.
Yeah, and they're made with olive oil instead of butter because we're in the South, and so olive oil often turns up in cookies or lard. These ones were made with olive oil and just sugar, a little lemon zest, a little bit of chopped up chocolate, a little bit of milk. And they're baked into these fat fingers, and they have a very mild flavor that just is perfect for dunking in milk. Then,
Mhm.
of course, there's uh, also from the south, from Puglia, the
Mhm.
intorchiate,
Oh,
which are
yes.
made with olive oil, and I've got
Mhm.
ciambella and intorchiate, and then they're studded with almonds, olive oil, and wine. And these I love to just dunk in my glass of wine,
Mhm. Yeah.
after dinner. They're crunchy and they're so delicious. So it's this wonderful ritual to start your day or even to end your day. You don't
Mhm.
have to have a giant piece of cake, just a nice little cookie that's not too sweet that you can dunk, whether it's in your morning coffee or your afternoon tea or your, digestivo or your little glass of wine. There's something about these rituals that's
Yeah.
so pleasing.
It might be a way of prolonging the conviviality of a meal that you have shared
Exactly.
together. Because,
Yes.
again, especially if we're talking about the after dinner dunking tradition, it could be more in liqueurs and so forth, is to linger. There are probably more stories that haven't come out yet at the end of it. So I think I always associated that type of experience as a good way of finishing, of wrapping up the meal, but there is one more. And again, the flavors are subtle, they are light. There is no frosting, there is no buttercream and so forth. It just, the almonds, the pine nuts, the olive oil, and so forth. So before we wrap up, you are involved in many other activities. You say that sometimes you do tours. I'm going to bring up your website so you can tell us a little bit about everything that people could do with or onto your website. First of all, to sign up on the newsletter, Buona Domenica would be the first step. But if someone wants to have a direct contact with you and experiences, what do you organize for them?
So I do just occasional culinary tours in parts of Italy. I used to do tours in Abruzzo, but that has been on hiatus for a while because the partners I was working with um, stopped doing them, and I am more of the creative person, not
Mhm.
so great with logistics. So I like to collaborate with
Mhm.
people. So I'm looking for collaborators in Abruzzo because I would love to bring people back to Abruzzo. I do small group tours. I don't do large tours. I don't do buses. Maximum 12 people. I really like 8 to 10. I think it's just a nice intimate
Mhm.
size. I just don't want anybody rambling around on a big bus. I want us to feel like a group. Um, so I do tours in Liguria. I
Mhm.
work with a small company called Beautiful Liguria, owned by two women, and we've been collaborating for years. And we sometimes combine Liguria with Piemonte or Liguria with Emilia-Romagna. This this coming fall, we're doing a Lakes District tour, which is
Mhm.
sold out. But I'm looking at 27 tours now, so I'm going to probably have those something listed at some point in the not too
Mhm.
distant future. Right now, I'm kind of consumed with Cookie Book. The book comes out in April, so that's kind of taking up all my time. But in addition to small group tours, I also do a couple of
Yes,
tours, food writing
mhm.
workshops.
In the
I'm
US as
collect.
well,
Yes, I
in May.
have one coming up in Maine in
Mhm.
May with two collaborators. A woman who is kind of an editor, book packager, and designer, and then another woman who is a food writer, an award-winning food writer, and she also does food on the radio. So we have kind of three different aspects, perspectives on the world of food writing, and we've got that coming up in May on Deer Isle, Maine, and then a food writing workshop slash tour in the western part of Liguria and the Western Riviera coming up in October that we actually do have some spots open for. So I do maybe two tours a year, one or two food writing workshops. I kind of keep it small because I think, parts of Italy are overrun with tourism, and we try to stay away from the parts of Italy that are overrun with tourists. So we won't go to the Cinque Terre necessarily, or Florence for sure, but we like to show people the parts of Italy where people still live and work. And um, I like to shine a light on food artisans and small wine producers, and olive oil producers. So the tours are always that kind, they have that component of going to see these places and having the opportunity to talk with these wonderful producers. There are so many throughout Italy. They don't make a ton of money. They do what they do because they love it. It's their family legacy that they are keeping, alive. And I love nothing more than to show people this part of Italy that is so important. It's so crucial. It really is, I know people talk about tourism being, it is, of course, indispensable to Italy, but to me, it's the people who continue the traditions that I
Mhm.
feel are indispensable and deserve the spotlight.
Yeah, indeed, the going behind the scene. So, and also the aroma entering in a pasticceria, if we're still reflecting on the cookies, I wish someone could bottle it. There is not something equivalent that I have been able to smell and feel here. And again, it's a mix of aromas, simplicity, and traditions,
Yes.
and happy customers all together.
Yes, and anise. The perfume of anice in
Mhm.
some of these bakeries when you walk in is just so lovely and warm. You know, that and the butter and the baking. It's yeah, there's
Yes.
nothing like it.
So, Domenica, I thoroughly enjoyed this journey throughout Italian food and Italy. Is there anything else that we should mention that we haven't, or anything coming up on your end? We got a preview because, again, the book will become publicly available in a few weeks in April. So, we urge everyone not only to reserve their book of Italian cookies, but once you are on Domenica's website or wherever you buy your books, you will be amazed by all the other publications that Domenica has written. So, anything else that you would like to add before we go into closing?
I will be going on, a little bit of a book tour here and there. I'll be going out to California and then uh, Portland, Oregon. At some point, I'm going to Chicago. I would love to know about places in Pittsburgh that I might, try to organize something because I feel like it would be a wonderful spot. I have been to Pittsburgh a few times and have loved it every time. I taught a
Mhm.
cooking class quite a few years ago, and I don't know, I've just had occasion to go there maybe two or three times and have really enjoyed it and would love to come back. And it sounds like it's a city full of cookie lovers.
Yeah,
So,
so on behalf of Istituto Mondo Italiano, I can indeed extend that invitation to you. We'll just have to look at our agendas and get you to the Berg.
I would love it. I would love it
Sooner
so
than later.
much.
So, Domenica, unfortunately, our time together for today is up, and il Big Ben ha detto stop, and it's time for us to say arrivederci e alla prossima. And we want to thank you for tuning in into the program. If you have any questions or comments, or if you have any topics you would like us to address, please contact us at the Italian Radio Hour at Gmail. We will .com. We would love to hear from you. And remember, if you or any of your family and friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, subscribe to the Italian Radio Hour on YouTube or where you catch your favorite podcasts. Also, don't forget to share this episode because sharing is caring. So I would like to thank again my guest, Domenica Marchetti. And our sponsor is Istituto Mondo Italiano e la Prima Espresso. Until next time, alla prossima. Ciao ciao!
Grazie, ciao.